can see your water rates were high, and your sewer rates were a little less than average on the next page at the top. That's all going to change as we add projects, but this is where we were when we were comparing. As we looked at your debt levels, if you took your pure geo debt and your revenue debt and added those together, you were at about 2,200 debt per capita, which is very normal for a city of your size. And one of our goals going into last fall was to keep the total at 4,500 or less. That was sort of our maximum debt level we were willing to go. And the reason being is Standard and S&P kind of considers that a moderate level of debt. And if you get going above that, now all of a sudden you're venturing into the high level of debt area. So council at the time said you cap it at 4,500. So the next few graphs, and then I'm just going to have you skip the text. I'll just kind of focus on the graph. But the next one on page 5 is a tax rate graph. And obviously this is in black and white. So it's, oh, you have it in color. Oh, good. Mine's in black and white. This is the tax rate page, and you'll see the green. I'm good. The green is your operating rate. So there's a levy, there's an X number of dollars in your levy associated with paying salaries and snow plowing and police protection and fire and so forth. That's the green part. The yellow part is the levy, dollars associated with your levy paying current debt. Now, if we can restrict ourselves as a council, now this is important, so as you go into budgeting, if we can keep our operational spending increasing at a pace equal to or less than how quickly the tax base actually grows, you see how that green is kind of flat across the line? If we increase our operations higher than what the tax base grows, that green tax rate goes up, okay? So, as a council, I'm asking you as part of this strategy to be careful in how much you increase operations from year to year. And we used a conservative 3% tax base growth from a year-to-year basis. So likewise, you'd have to keep, salaries at 3% and utilities at 3%, all that sort of thing. But if we are able to do so, as you can see, the levy on the debt side of things goes down. If the goal is to keep the tax rate fairly flat, that creates tax capacity to add new projects. And that was one of the major sources that we identified for all those projects that got approved last year, okay? Granted, you could have done nothing, and the tax rate, you could have allowed the tax rate to drop as the debt got paid off. Council decided they had priorities for those projects. Utility rates, water fund and sewer fund, we're showing the need for rate increases, even if you didn't add projects. But you'll see it, those are necessary as we go on. There's an assumption page which I will basically skip. And then when you get to page 8, you have the projects for the 2009 and 2010 years. Now, just because it's on paper doesn't mean you're going to do it, okay? It's just a plan that measures its impact. So if you decide not to do any of these projects or change them, what we will do is I will come back, we'll put the model back up on the screen, you tell me the changes you want to make, and then I'll tell you what the new impacts are based on what you tell me. But nevertheless, you see the water improvements there, which was a PFA loan, and then everything else to the right was basically the big bond issue I was involved in last year. And then in 2010, you see there's a project there called City Buildings with $500,000 of cash. It's actually $525,000 of cash because I figured in some inflation. But that's what we were talking about earlier in terms of the other document. Okay. Then there was a wastewater treatment plant upgrade in 2010. We don't know when that's actually going to be necessary. We just knew that that's sort of a big project looming in the future, so we wanted to account for it in the plan. Doesn't mean you're actually going to do it in 2010. We just wanted to account for it. Okay.
Like they have started working in that direction. They've authorized the preparation.
All right. And then 2012 and beyond, we have another large phased-in street project to the tune of $1.5 million. Now, we don't note what streets those are. We did that on purpose so the council at the time, should the assumptions and projections in this plan hold fairly true going into that year, they can decide which streets are the priority, but at least they'll have a budgeted number to kind of work under. But now we get to the impacts of all that. If we do everything that's listed, that's when you get into these graphs here in the back. And you can see the tax rate page. You see with the red, see how it kind of flattens out over the next 4, instead of going down, stays up there in that same range for the next few years. Then you see the need for the water rate increases down below. Have you already instituted those, by the way?
February.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, we gotta keep up with that because now you have a loan outstanding, so. Then you see the sewer fund having annual increases going into the future. And, you know, that's driven partly by the wastewater treatment plant. So I would advise sticking with this on an annual basis. Don't just let the rate stay flat, because what will happen is when that project hits, instead of going up some each year, you're gonna go whoosh all at once, okay? That's gonna be difficult to do. And then finally, I shouldn't say finally, but one of the most important graphs is this one at the bottom that's called monthly cost increase. And basically we said, okay, if you live in Rushford and you have a house that's worth $150,000, that house goes up in value every year, let's say 2-3%, and you use 5,000 gallons of water in a month, you're gonna have sewer bills, water bills, and a tax bill. You're gonna pay a total of X dollars for the year. Going into 2010 and beyond, how much more per month is my budget as a resident gonna go up based on what we did in this plan? And that's what this graph attempts to measure. So I put a line there for 3% being the historic rate of inflation, and you can see in the first few to several years, we're unable to stay under that 3%. Long range, we are. But in the first few years, it just wasn't possible. Not if they wanted to take on all the projects that got approved last year. But close. Okay? And that's not cumulative, by the way. You don't add those. You just simply take that whatever year you are compared to 2009. And I did it on a monthly basis because most folks understand a monthly budget. And most folks have their mortgages maybe rolled into an escrow account and their utility bills are monthly. I thought it was easier for folks on this side to understand it in monthly terms. On page 12, and I guess this is for Councilor Bunky, there's your capital outlay fund. You see it up in that $800,000 range. We take that 500 grand out and shoo, goes down. But we're still contributing a little bit of cash. And there's other equipment and purchases going on, which I believe there's a page in the back that lists what those are. But I wanted to point that out to you because you're the one who raised the question. Then we have our debt per capita ratios and so forth. And then finally, yep, there it is. This is a spreadsheet that Kathy and the rest of the staff put together in the very, very back. So you can understand the cash in and the cash out of that capital outlay fund. So what's not on here, this is the part this lengthy, boring presentation, the point is to show you is nothing in those impacts includes anything for a library loan. Okay? We show $500,000 of cash coming out, but at the time, the assumption being made was that grants and fundraising were basically going to offset the rest of the cost. So to the extent that that's not successful, and you do a loan for the library, those impacts change now. Okay, because that's not, you didn't see that anywhere in there, right? You didn't see the library, you saw a cash project, 500,000. And then the other thing that's not in there is the new LGA cuts coming into the future, so that's another challenge. So those two things I want you to be fully aware of as you're making